The kitchen staff called him Old Joe. He showed up at 4 p.m., washed dishes until midnight, never said much to anyone. Just another invisible worker at Le Bernardin's sister restaurant in D.C. But when gunmen stormed the dining room, targeting a high-profile diplomat, the humble dishwasher revealed he wasn't just cleaning plates. He'd been protecting lives all along. His real name was Joseph Michael Santos, but nobody at Lumiere had asked for his full name in the 8 years he worked there. He was just Joe, the dishwasher. 54 years old, 5'8", graying hair always hidden under a worn baseball cap, hands permanently stained from years of industrial soap and scalding water. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible tale of hidden identity and quiet protection, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about invisible guardians deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Lumiere wasn't just any restaurant. Located 6 blocks from the White House, it was where Washington's power brokers conducted business over $30 appetizers and $200 bottles of wine. Senators negotiated deals between courses. Ambassadors discussed treaties over dessert. Foreign ministers sealed agreements with handshakes and champagne. The restaurant's clientele read like a who's who of international politics. On any given evening, you might find the Secretary of State dining with the German Chancellor, or tech billionaires hosting private dinners for Supreme Court justices. The kind of establishment where reservations were made months in advance and security was supposedly built into the location's discretion. Joe worked in the basement kitchen, 3 levels below the dining room, where history was made nightly. His world consisted of industrial sinks, commercial dishwashers, and an endless stream of expensive plates that needed to be spotless before returning upstairs. He arrived every afternoon at exactly 3:55 p.m., used his employee key card to enter through the service alley, descended 2 flights of stairs to the prep kitchen, and disappeared into routine. Clock in, tie on his apron, power up the dish machines, and begin 8 hours of methodical, invisible labor. The other kitchen staff barely noticed him. Head chef Marcel Dubois was too focused on maintaining his James Beard Award reputation to concern himself with dishwashers. The sous chefs were consumed with prep work and plating perfection. The servers were upstairs schmoozing with politicians and angling for better tips. Joe existed in the spaces between their attention. Always working, never complaining, completely forgettable. Joe, we need the lobster plates clean in 5 minutes. Copy that. Joe, the espresso cups are backing up. On it. 2 words at a time. Never more conversation than absolutely necessary. Never personal details. Never questions about anyone else's business. The management appreciated his reliability. 8 years, never missed a shift, never caused problems, never needed supervision. The kind of employee restaurants desperately need but rarely acknowledge. What they didn't know was Joseph Michael Santos had chosen this job very carefully. Not for the pay, which was barely above minimum wage. Not for the benefits, which were practically non-existent. Not for the working conditions, which involved standing over scalding water in a basement for 8 hours straight. He'd chosen Lumiere because of its location, because of its clientele, because it was exactly the kind of place where national security intersected with fine dining, where international incidents could be prevented or started over a perfectly prepared soufflé. Joe lived alone in a studio apartment in Arlington, a 40-minute metro ride from downtown D.C. Sparse, functional, unremarkable. But if anyone had looked closely, which nobody ever did, they might have noticed some unusual details. The apartment had better security than most government buildings. Triple locks, reinforced door frame, a surveillance system that monitored the hallway outside. The windows were equipped with ballistic glass. The walls contained signal-blocking materials that prevented electronic surveillance. In the bedroom closet, behind winter coats he rarely wore, was a safe containing items that would raise serious questions. Federal credentials that were technically expired but still carried weight, tactical equipment maintained in perfect condition, and photographs of men and women whose faces occasionally appeared on the evening news, usually in connection with words like assassination or international incident. Special Agent Joseph Michael Santos, United States Secret Service, spent 22 years protecting presidents, vice presidents, and visiting foreign dignitaries. Specialized in advanced security, threat assessment, and close protection. A career that officially ended in 2015 when he took early retirement after a classified incident that was never reported in the news. But some retirements are more theoretical than actual. The Secret Service has a saying, once you've taken a bullet for the Republic, you never really stop. Joe Santos had never taken a bullet, but he prevented several people from taking bullets who probably should have. Politicians whose mistakes could start wars. Diplomats whose deaths could destabilize regions. Foreign leaders whose safety was more important to American interests than their own people realized. When he retired from active duty, he had been approached by people who didn't officially exist, working for agencies that weren't listed in any government directory. People who needed someone with his skills to keep an eye on situations that fell between the cracks of official protection details. Lumiere was one of those cracks. The restaurant wasn't on any official list of secured locations. The clientele didn't request federal protection for their private dinners, but the conversations that happened there sometimes had implications that reached far beyond the dining room. Joe's job was simple: be invisible, be observant, and be ready. For 8 years, he'd washed dishes and watched, memorized faces, noted unusual patterns, identified potential threats. Most nights, nothing happened beyond rich people eating expensive food and making deals that would affect millions of lives. But he was always ready for the night that would be different. Tuesday, March 15th started like any other evening shift. Joe arrived at 3:55 p.m., clocked in, began his prep routine. The dinner reservations looked typical for a weeknight. A pharmaceutical lobbyist entertaining FDA officials, tech executives hosting members of the House Intelligence Committee, and the French ambassador to the United States celebrating his daughter's engagement with a private family dinner. Ambassador Henry Dubois, no relation to the chef, had reserved the restaurant's private dining room for 8 people. Family members, close friends, the kind of intimate gathering that diplomacy security usually didn't worry about. Low profile, low risk, minimal threat assessment. Joe had seen the ambassador before. Quiet, sophisticated, the kind of career diplomat who preferred negotiation to confrontation. France and the United States were allies. There was no obvious reason to expect trouble. But Joe had learned long ago that obvious reasons were rarely the ones that got people killed. The evening service began normally. Joe fell into his rhythm. Rinse, load, wash, dry, stack, repeat. Plates came down from the dining room bearing the remnants of meals that cost more than most Americans made in a day. He cleaned them methodically, efficiently, invisibly. Around 7:30, the first course went up to the ambassador's private dining room. Joe noted the timing, the number of plates, the usual details that had become second nature. At 8:15, something felt wrong. There wasn't anything specific, no alarms, no obvious threats, just the subtle shift in atmosphere that comes from 22 years of training your senses to detect danger before it arrives. Joe looked around the kitchen. Everything appeared normal. The staff was focused on their tasks, the orders were flowing smoothly, the rhythm of service was undisturbed. But his instincts were screaming. He wiped his hands on his apron, walked to the service corridor that led to the main floor, and listened. The dining room sounded normal. Conversation, laughter, the gentle clink of silverware on expensive china. Then he heard something that didn't belong. Footsteps in the main corridor. Too many of them. Too coordinated, moving with military precision rather than the casual pace of restaurant patrons. Joe returned to his station, but his entire posture had changed. He was still washing dishes, but his eyes were now constantly scanning, his body coiled for action, his mind running through tactical assessments he'd hoped never to use again. 3 minutes later, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the kitchen in red. Standard procedure for power outages, nothing unusual. Except the power hadn't gone out. Someone had cut the main electrical lines. Joe heard the first gunshot from upstairs, then screaming. The kitchen staff froze in confusion and terror. In the red emergency lighting, their faces showed the kind of panic that comes when normal people suddenly realize they're in the middle of something they don't understand and can't control. Joe Santos understood completely. Professional assault, coordinated timing, multiple shooters, military-grade equipment. Target, Ambassador Dubois and his family. Location, chosen specifically because it was supposed to be secured, off the radar, protected by discretion rather than official security. The attackers had done their homework. They knew the restaurant's layout, the security protocols, the staff schedules. They'd planned this operation with the kind of precision that suggested government training. Joe had approximately 90 seconds to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could follow his cover identity, hide in the kitchen, wait for law enforcement, hope that local police could handle a situation they weren't trained for, stay invisible, protect his secret, let other people handle the crisis. Or he could do what he'd been trained to do for 2 decades, what he'd been hired to do for the last 8 years, even if nobody else knew he was doing it. Special Agent Joseph Santos made his decision in less than 5 seconds. He opened the supply closet, where he kept his cleaning supplies, reached behind the industrial soap containers, and retrieved items that had been waiting there for 8 years. A tactical vest, a service weapon, communication equipment, and federal credentials that might be expired, but still carried the full weight of the United States government. The transformation was instantaneous. The humble dishwasher disappeared. In his place stood a federal agent with 2 decades of experience protecting the most important people in the world. "Listen to me carefully," he told the terrified kitchen staff, his voice carrying an authority none of them had ever heard before. "My name is Special Agent Santos, United States Secret Service. We are under attack by hostile forces. I need you to follow my instructions exactly." The staff stared at him in shock. The quiet dishwasher had vanished, replaced by someone who commanded attention and obedience through pure presence. "Marcel, you know this building better than anyone. I need you to guide the staff to the basement storage area and lock the door behind you. Do not come out until law enforcement gives the all-clear." "But Joe, what are you—" "Agent Santos, and I'm going upstairs to do my job." He moved toward the service elevator, every step revealing training and experience that had been hidden for 8 years. His movements were fluid, efficient, deadly. The elevator opened onto chaos. The main dining room had been transformed into a battlefield, tables overturned, expensive art shattered, terrified patrons crouched behind whatever cover they could find. 3 men in tactical gear moved through the room with military precision, weapons raised, controlling the space with professional competence. But they'd made a crucial error. They'd assumed that a high-end restaurant in downtown D.C. would contain only soft targets: politicians, diplomats, wealthy civilians, people who might have bodyguards, but who weren't trained for combat themselves. They hadn't planned for Special Agent Joseph Santos. Joe assessed the situation in seconds: 3 hostiles, automatic weapons, tactical gear. Approximately 40 civilians in the dining room, most taking cover, but some frozen in panic. The ambassador and his family were in the private dining room, which the gunmen were moving towards systematically. Standard Secret Service protocols called for calling in backup, establishing a perimeter, negotiating for hostage release. But there was no time for standard protocols. Joe Santos had 90 seconds before the gunmen reached the ambassador's family. What happened next would be studied in federal training academies for years to come. Agent Santos moved through the dining room like a ghost, using the overturned furniture and panicked civilians as cover. He identified the gunmen's leader, their communication patterns, their positioning weaknesses. The first hostile went down without ever seeing who shot him: clean, quiet, professional. The second turned toward the sound, but Joe was already moving, using the chaos and shadows to his advantage. Another precise shot, another threat eliminated. The team leader realized he was facing a professional opponent, someone with training, equipment, and experience, someone who belonged in this fight. "Federal agent," Joe called out, his voice cutting through the chaos, "release your weapons and surrender." The response came in automatic weapon fire. Joe rolled behind the overturned piano, came up with perfect sight lines, and took the shot that ended the threat.
3 minutes after leaving the kitchen, the dining room was secure. Agent Santos moved quickly through the space, checking on civilians, securing weapons, calling for medical assistance. His movements were efficient, compassionate, completely professional. Ambassador Dubois emerged from the private dining room, his family shaken but unharmed. "Who are you?" the ambassador asked, staring at the man who had been washing his dishes an hour ago. Joe holstered his weapon, straightened his tactical vest, and for a moment, let the quiet dishwasher show through. "Just someone who's been keeping an eye on things, sir. Making sure you and your family stay safe." The ambassador studied him, taking in the federal credentials, the professional competence, and the 8 years of careful observation. "You've been protecting us all along, haven't you?" Joe nodded. "Some jobs don't end when you retire from them. They just become quieter." Law enforcement arrived within minutes. FBI, Secret Service, DC Metro Police, a full tactical response to what had been prevented by a single agent working alone. Joe Santos gave his report, turned in his equipment, and disappeared into the bureaucratic machinery that handles classified incidents. By morning, the official story was simple: attempted robbery gone wrong, stopped by alert security. The media never learned about the diplomatic assassination plot, the federal agent working undercover as a dishwasher, and the international implications of what had been prevented. Joe returned to work the next evening at 3:54 p.m. He clocked in, tied on his apron, and began washing dishes. But something had changed in the restaurant. The staff looked at him differently now. The management treated him with the respect that hadn't been there before. And the ambassador, when he returned for dinner the following week, made sure to visit the kitchen personally. "Thank you," Ambassador Dubois said simply. Joe looked up from the sink, water dripping from his hands. "Just doing my job, sir. Both of them." Joe Santos continued working at Lumiere for 2 more years before quietly disappearing. No farewell party, no forwarding address. He simply stopped showing up one day. The restaurant hired a new dishwasher, but the plates never quite achieved the same level of cleanliness. And sometimes, late at night, when the dining room was filled with powerful people making important decisions, the staff would wonder if their new employee was just washing dishes, or if he was watching over them too. Because in a city where power and danger intersect daily, someone has to keep watch. And sometimes, the most important guardian is the one you never notice, until the moment you need them most.